Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm thrilled to have you join me today for the introduction to AAVE Class 1. This course is an extension of a presentation I did with two other scholars at the recent Modern Language Association convention in New Orleans last month. The session was sponsored by the Children's Literature Association, which is an organization dedicated to promoting the study and appreciation of children's literature in all its forms. I'm your instructor, Shakima Funches, and I am excited to delve into this topic with you all today. Before we begin, though, I do think we should contextualize why this discussion is so important. AAVE is crucial in reflecting the diverse linguistic and cultural landscape of our world. And as we start the second day of Black History Month, we know that there are a lot of external efforts at trying to silence the voices of people of color. And so that's why we must preserve it. For Class 1, we're going to be examining historical roots and touching on the study of languages in a social context. Next Sunday, we'll be exploring the phonological features of AAVE, including sound patterns, pronunciation rules, and I am going to touch briefly on it today, but we'll delve more into it. Course materials will be available by tomorrow on my website, www.adventuresinzen.com. Unfortunately, it will not be today because I have not slept, and I do need to sleep after this. So I'm just going to get this out there for you guys and post it, and then I'm going to take a little siesta, and then we'll get back to the grind. Okay, so Sounds of Culture, Introduction to AAVE, Class 1. And so here you'll see some definitions. AAV encompasses unique grammatical structures, vocabulary, and pronunciation patterns that set it aside from other dialects of English, including Standard American English. The grammatical features include constructions such as the double negative, I didn't go nowhere, or the absence of the copula in certain sentences like she my sis instead of she is my sister. The phonological features include like the neuroticity, including dropping the R sound at the end of syllables, the simplification of diphthongs, where you combine the two syllables, time versus tan. Or you have specific annotation patterns that you have. So the AV vocabulary, when you look at mainstream English, is definitely a lot of decolonized. And they like to use AV in pop culture, and like they say, they like to use our rhythm but not our blues. But when we use it, it's seen as a sign of less intelligence, and a lot of issues come with language discrimination and language bias. There is no scholarly research that backs that either. But again, what is true on paper and what people believe we know for a fact to be completely different. They are mutually exclusive. This right here is a quick comparative highlight of the key differences between dialect, Creole, Patois, and Pidgin. I am not going to read it all for you, but you see it there, and I'm just going to summarize. The dialect emerges naturally when language and speakers of the same language communicate with each other. There's notable differences when they communicate, though. So you look at British English versus American English, Egyptian colloquial Arabic versus modern standard Arabic, or even American Sign Language versus Black American Sign Language. What's important though is even though they are separate, the speakers of these languages still can understand each other generally, despite systematic differences in sound, structure, and vocabulary. Creole, however, emerges as a context where the speakers of different native languages need to communicate with each other. And so that's often due to trade, colonization, or slavery. And it is a blending of two or more parent languages. So, for example, Haitian Creole originated from the interactions between French colonizers and American slaves, much like AAV can trace its roots back to the transatlantic slave trade. Haitian Creole combines the elements of French with African language, and so the Creole is a more complex grammar and expanded vocabulary that you'll see than maybe like a dialect or a pidgin. Pidgins refer to a more rural, non-standard language or dialect. It's generally when they are confined to particular areas and they're passed down more through oral tradition rather than written tradition. It's not really considered a formal linguistic classification, so you'll see it with colloquial vernaculars. But for instance, Jamaican Creole is often called by speakers patois. So that is something to take into account too. And then the pidgin develops from native speakers, but is less complex. It's essentially vocabulary terms for very basic, quick communication. There are no native speakers. So, like as you see with the Creole, native speakers are formed from acquired essentially from birth. And so, when you look at the Pidgin, you'll see that it emerges due, like I said, due to like trade interactions. So look at like Nigerian Pidgin, they go chop the rice, or them go chop the rice. And so when they're speaking, they're thinking that somebody might be going to fetch the rice, but we, as AAV speakers, will understand that that means they go eat the rice, because we know culturally there are other words that are similar to it, used in such as, for instance, the Caribbean, like nam. Um, when you look at standard American English speakers, however, though, they might understand it in a more literal understanding, because they don't have the same cultural inference that we have. So they may think to go fetch the rice, or even to physically actually chop rice. Give me a little second to look that over. And patois can carry a pejorative connotation, so we do want to make sure that we're not using it to imply that the speech is uncultured or inferior. It's merely to reflect the sentence structure and the vocabulary. So it should be used in certain contexts, and you have to understand the audience perception when utilizing it, such as if you would use the term ebonics, which combines ebony and phonics, and started and got prominence with the 1996 Oakland School Board resolution. However, to date, we use AAVE or Black English in lieu of Ebonics due to the controversy. We're going to speak more about that in week 9. When exploring the influences of AAVE, we must consider the impact of globalization, technology, and migration on cultural production and linguistic dynamics. So, previous discussions have often framed the debate of AV or Ebonics as, slang versus proper English. However, that perspective is centered on language-based racism, and it's aimed at diminishing, as I said, the voices of people of color and perpetuating the dominance of standard American English in literary spaces and outside of literary spaces. And it's built on ignorance, prejudice, hostility, common misconceptions that standard American English is superior, despite the lack of, as we already said, empirical evidence. So even well-meaning individuals will excite or apply a black tax in order to be credible, in order to be considered intelligent, and to be considered having high moral character. You should not use AAV. You should code switch. But when you look at Shorzinen's work, the historical overview of linguistic perceptivism reveals that this is an archaic view of good grammar, and it's arbitrarily implied to, show an elitist obsession with European languages, linguistic purity, specifically like Latin and British American English, in lieu of other languages. And so in America, it's not only a marker of classism, but it also is entangled very strongly with white supremacist attitudes of, in order to be considered good, you must be also considered closer to whiteness. And so that's why preserving AAVE and the sound of the resistance is important. Our words, our experiences expressed as such. To understand AAV fully, we need to next look at the historical context. So the transatlantic slave trade had a devastating impact on African languages. Despite all of its efforts, though, it did not erase them entirely in the Americas. So during slavery, Africans were often separated from those who spoke their native language, which led to the emergence of Pidgin and then Creole languages as a means of communication. This resulted in the further development into what we now call AAVE. The languages included various West African languages such as Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, and these influences show the adaptation and mergence with English. And so that linguistic heritage is a testament to the resilience of African culture, African American culture, and its enduring spirit to remain alive and in use. And so after the abolishment of slavery, then we continue to see this evolution of African American community and the languages that we use. So they continue to be shaped by ongoing interactions with mainstream American English and diverse influences presented in urban environments and language modification from cultural pockets across the Americas and the Caribbean. An example of this is the English-based Creole, the Gullah language, which has strong African retentions. Despite its cultural significance, though, AAVE still faces challenges and controversies with, like I said, the accusations of perpetuating stereotypes or diluting linguistic intelligence. And so as we continue to have these discussions and cultural examinations, we're going to continue to foster a more nuanced understanding of how AV is central to pushing boundaries and, making sure that it doesn't get discredited or misunderstood as Gen Z lingo or marginalized while it being just slang when it's a legitimate linguistic system with its own rules and structures. Linguist William Laveau's research and the Oakland School Board's resolution played a significant role in acknowledging AV's validity. And so when we're looking at how people use language at home and how that needs to be represented to enhance their literary development, we know that we have to continue to engage with AVE in and out of literary circles and, even in professional settings. So code switching, while is a novelty that, can sometimes keep your safety, we want to get to a level where it is no longer needed. Let's talk about origins. So the origins of AAV have been subject to extensive scholarly debate, and everyone kind of has their own hypothesis on developing and how it came from what source. So as we talked about first, the Creole hypothesis postulates that AAV developed by the transatlantic slave trade. It, for me, feels like the hypothesis that has the most actual bearing to, historical findings and development when you look at how Africans with these diverse native languages were first to combine and commit to a common communication when they were talking with each other from other countries and then English speaking colonizers. The pidgin language developing into a fully developed Creole is what we know to languages do from current research. And so then they believe that it underwent a process of decreolization, converging again with standard American English while retaining distinct grammatical and phonological features. And so that's the AV that we currently know today. And this hypothesis points to the similarities that we see between AAVE and Caribbean Creoles, such as suggesting that they have this similar ancestry. However, the dialect hypothesis is also known as the Angelus hypothesis, and its proponents' perspective is that AAVE is a dialect that evolved directly from early English dialects brought to the Americas by British settlers. This view, while it does highlight the interactions of Africans with indentured English servants and settlers, I think it displays and downgrades the effect of the transatlantic slave trade and movement, the Great Migration, and we'll talk about that a little later. However, I must say that I do understand and can see the similarities in certain regional and non-standard dialects from the UK. So, for instance, if you look at the use of ate, double negation, the omission of the verb to be, the use of done, um, such as she done told you. These are parallels that we'll see in Cockney and other UK colloquial forms. In addition, there are vocabulary parallels such as fixed it and gonna that are used extensively throughout the languages, the vernaculars. And so this view can't be fully dismissed, but it does take away that intermediary Creole stage that we were talking about. And so it just skips over that and says it went from A to C, and that was it. Another part or substrate hypothesis is the emphasis that yes, African languages had a developmental AVE, but it wasn't due to the transatlantic slave trade. It wasn't due to the intermediate Creole stage. Instead, the development is saying that there was this focus on a direct transfer of linguistic features. So there's no decreolization into the AVE that we know now. And so what they're saying is that African language just melded with English during the language acquisition period, and that was it. And then you'll have Middle English Creole hypothesis, and this perspective is held by some linguists, and it proposes that English itself is a Creole. And so it underwent a creolization process during the Middle Ages due to contact with Old Norse and Norman French. And so this view sees both Middle English, Modern English, and AAV all as Creole origins. And so in the end, I think it's like something where there's more than one way to cook your eggs, but at the end of the day, there are just eggs. And so it really depends on what you feel has the most background and back into it. At the end of the day, like I said, I do feel that African American language is based off of Africans' interaction during that specific period. You can whether say it's direct or if it had a stopping point and then it merged into it to become AAVE. We'll leave that up to people who have been spending 20, 30 years looking at, the different patterns and historical context to back that up. So in week 4, we're going to look at examples that highlight this evolution of AAV that we're discussing. But until then, we're just going to touch on the historical timeline as it aligns with the Creole hypothesis. And then, like I said, by tomorrow, 3 p.m., I'll put the resources on the website, including the AAVE family tree. As we did discuss 2 videos ago, the AAVE family tree is under the Germanic branch. In the Indo-European family, and it falls within the West Germanic grouping. So when we start, we'll see the 17th century, there's a need for communication for Africans who were stolen from Africa, and so they developed these various pidgins. And then in the 19th century, these pidgins incorporate elements into the West African language and develop into these more complex creoles. The plantation system then fosters the development of distinct varieties of English and takes it across the Southern Americas. And so generation after generation, these creoles are passed down and they're gradually converging with standard American English. And then it gives rise to African American vernacular as we know it. And so African American vernacular is a manifestation of that development, including then cultural and regional and urban differences. So during the Great Migration, as people are moving across and leaving the rural South to push to urban centers in North and Midwest, we continue to see this development and diversity that we see in AAVE, and it spreads. It's almost like wildfire once the civil rights movement takes off, and it brings increased attention to and I think a lot of effort was put into addressing issues of language inequality. And so it creates this reevaluation of what is AAVE. And so scholars like William Laveau conduct groundbreaking research, and they're looking to demonstrate that AAVE is a rule-governed and systematic dialect. By the time we reach the 1990s, the Oakland School Board's recognition of Ebonics as the language of African American students sparks a national debate about language, race, and education. And that debate is still going on today as AAVE follows itself to research and scrutiny and whether or not it belongs in the classroom. And so I think it is greatly needed that we challenge language-based discrimination and preserve AAV's seat at the table, essentially. So AAV is often misunderstood and unfairly stigmatized, and you say, well, why? Where are these misconceptions true from? And it's not just because of racism, but that is mostly the reason. And as I stated before, this mislabeling of it as broken English, as a linguistic system that doesn't have any internal logic, is all rooted in language-based racism and bias. And so it's often overlooked that speakers of AAVE are genuinely biodialectical, that they can code switch based on context. And so the way that they associate language, and especially in social contexts, is at a higher functioning level than a monolingual would. There is also this homogeneity assumption that only African Americans speak AAVE and that it is only used in urban or considered rap language, none of that being true at all. And we'll see that, people from diverse ethnic backgrounds adopt elements of AAVE, and in mainstream and pop culture, they will tend to use AAVE and not provide credit for where its origins are. So the detractors of AAVE often don't understand its significance in linguistic and cultures. And so that's why linguists have been studying and trying to highlight AAVE's ability to provide insight into the effects of language contact and how socio-historical factors have had a direct impact on the development of American English dialects. So because of that, AAVE is significant to understanding American culture and has had a significant influence on certain genres, including music. When you look at jazz, hip hop, R&B, and we're going to expand on that when we talk about AV in the media and AV in literature later in the course. We're going to pause on this. A great philosopher, Crystal Jean, once said, "Words mean things." And so this right here is just a brief charting of how geography and regional location can influence African American vernacular words. Any of these words, if you saw it as an AV speaker, you would understand essentially what the core adjective and what the synonym for is, and maybe what your regional dialect is. But I do want to show here how the words don't look as we would see maybe in more formalized language or vernaculars similar to each other. So, for instance, if I am using Arabic or Spanish as a Romance language, they have words that are similar based on actual format because of how their root clause and declension works. So, for instance, camisa and camiseta, I could tell from inference that those words might be similar. But when I'm looking at this, if I'm a non AAV speaker and I'm looking at a word such as like capping, faking, flexing, or fraudulent, I might not be able to infer the inference. But a person who is born in AVE and raised in that culture will understand it because these words are inherent to an experience that we all share or similarly share. So I think that is very interesting and how, again, language connects us through cultural experience. I find myself coming back to this quote by Dr. Wonderful Faison, chair of the English department at Langston University. And it goes, "If I said it before, I done said it 1,000 times. If you can't take the black off my face, you sure can't take the black off my tongue. My language is me, and I am my language. It lives, it moves, it breathes. To kill my language is to kill me. Period. Point blank. End of story." And so I think, and we will talk a little bit further in the course, we need to understand what happens when you kill a language. You kill its people. You disconnect them from their roots and increase a sense of displacement that increases the struggle when they try to relate to themselves and to others. It kind of puts a hedge to their success. And we're going to talk about that more in week 9. And I think that AAVE, as I said, is a sound of resistance. And so preserving it is important to moving forward as a people. And I think that understanding where it came from is how we're going to better understand where we're going. We're closing up here now, and I just want to go back to, if you noticed on the cover, you saw IYKYK. And so we're about to go full circle and circle back to today's mathematics. Now, I'm not a 5%er, but I do believe wisdom, knowledge, all being born to understanding. Simply put, you show your work so people can see the importance of what you're doing. And so knowledge comes before wisdom, and wisdom gives birth to understanding. As a professional student of life, it's important that you have this in your repertoire bag so that you're unstoppable. And so what I say this is that to know your value and the value of your culture means that it's harder for people to be, or detractors to be dismissive of it. I think I get asked a lot, and is how do we convince people to accept AVE? It makes them uncomfortable. They don't feel like they can understand it. And what do you say to those people who say they can't understand it, or they feel it's too low to be in scholarly or professional circles? I think what you start out anyway, saying is that representation matters, and that the weaponization of speech will only silence a group of people who need to be heard, especially at this time. When you look at like Shakespearean English, it's very different from the English spoken by many of his contemporaries at the time. And so they seen it as unusual or incorrect, and he wasn't from the highest social class, so his language was seen as sometimes common or vulgar, unsophisticated. And now you fast forward to today, and conservative scholars, the aristocracy, they all love his language, and we still talk about it. It's permeated circles that, despite initial reservations, people didn't think it would achieve. And, even though it's not in or no longer in common use, we still study it. We reference it today. I think that's what I would tell them, is that you look at AAV in the lens that it should be viewed under, and understand that who decides what's good language and who decides what words matter. And I think when you get to the root of that, you'll get to the root of the bias, and then any other argument is also almost null and void. All right, we made it. discussion board prompts. I just want you guys overall to engage with your peers by responding to their posts, noting similarities and sharing your personal language experiences. Over here, you'll see some discussion board prompts that you can utilize. You do not have to stick to that or even answer all of that. I'm more looking for natural discourse regarding today's class and future things that we're going to cover in the course. Please let me know if there's anything that you feel I should expand upon, anything you may have questions on. I look forward to the discussion next week. And just a reminder, it's adventuresinzen.com is the website. It will be the resources, including the PowerPoint, will be uploaded by tomorrow by 3 p.m. because I'm going to sleep. So I will check you guys later. Be safe, protect your peace, cover your edges, and hydrate.